parental unit who is a woman. There's also some research on things like the archetype of a mom friend or a mother friend. There's a little bit of that afterward in the resources, where men and non-binary people can also be a mom friend, and it would be perfectly reasonable and grammatical to say, yeah, this is Robert and he is the mom friend, or he is my mom friend. What English does not have is gender for inanimates or concepts. So freedom or table don't have a gender at all in English, whereas they're both female in Spanish or feminine in Spanish. It also doesn't have agreement. So like I said, we can absolutely say he's my mom friend, and that's perfectly fine. And also English doesn't have gender marks. Outside of some exceptions like blonde, blonde, fiancé, fiancé, which are loan words or calques from French, but English itself doesn't really have gender marks. To illustrate this, I have the clause, the phrase, he's tall, which in Spanish would be él es alto. And you can actually omit the pronoun, and we generally do omit the pronouns because the conjugation tells us already that this is third person singular. And we have alto, which is masculine. So we know that this is, he is tall. And it's important here that the morpheme at the end means that this person is masculine. This means that this person is tall and masculine. Tall must be masculine, and there's no way to express tall without it. If we have something like Cumin's my friend, Comino es mi is really easy, but then we need to decide what gender Comino is. So Comino can be if she uses she, her, Comino can be mi amiga. If he uses he, him, he can be my amigo. And that's the end of traditional Spanish. There's no more. That's all we got. There's a ton of current strategies. The one that I personally use for myself is the E, so amigue, or E. Amiguex is pretty popular in the US, but there's a lot of different strategies. All of these are what I call in my research neomorphines, and they are a part of a larger thing that I call direct non-binary language. The opposite of direct non-binary language would be indirect, surprise. And that same sentence we could express in a couple of different ways, like yo soy amiga suya, I am Cumin's friend, or I am their friend, but there's no gender in this one. Or es mi colega, mi compa, like Cumin is my bud. Or es una de mis amistades, like Cumin is one of my friendships. And while all of these do portray pretty much the same information, they do express basically the same thing, that's not the same sentence. So you really can't say, ella es mi amiga, él es mi amigo, es mi amistad. Like that's not the same thing, right? It changes a little bit. So indirect non-binary language does make sense for some things. It does make sense when you just don't want to gender anyone, when you don't want to make it explicit. It actually does help some non-binary people stay safer. Even binary trans people do use, I don't have the research on this, but I know this. We do use indirect non-binary language at the beginning of our transition when we don't want to misgender ourselves, but it's also not safe to out ourselves in specific scenarios. But what I want to talk about today is direct non-binary language in Spanish, also in different Romance languages. I know that this happens in Galician, which is spoken where I am located, but Spanish is the one language that I research. And DNL in Spanish is mostly restricted to a few neologisms and mostly morpheme things. And for this purposes, I'm going to split them into neomorphemes, which really are all of these, and then symbols, which should be a subcategory. The neomorphemes that I really study for my research are the ones with letters, the ones that we can't pronounce, because I'm interested in how non-binary people just speak and how people speak about us. But the symbols are doing some really cool things. And this is adjacent to my research. I don't have a ton of data. I just want to tell you about it because it's really, really cool. So they are being used to express ideologies and identities and nationalities. Like Unidas Podemos, on paper, when it does have a morpheme, this one is in the feminine. Unidas Podemos is a coalition party in Spain. It's a leftist coalition party. And in here, they have done a couple of things. This is actually their logo. I don't know if it's changed, but this one I grabbed from 2019. And they do a couple of things here. First off, they are decentering the neutral masculine, the generic masculine, which the prescriptivists want us to believe is real and is okay to use. And also, like, a lot of people are actually losing it. So it is a little bit risky for a leftist party to use this neutral masculine, right? So they are avoiding it. They are decentering it. They are also avoiding neomorphines because it would similarly be risky to put an E on there or an X, right? That would be considered pretty radical. And in politics, you don't want to lose voters or something. So they don't want to do that. What they are doing is they are centering a heart, which, I mean, we can all interpret however we want, but we can assume that it means like heart or support or camaraderie. Similarly, in 2019 in Argentina, there's Frente de Todos. So this one on paper is generic masculine, which was another leftist coalition party under which the current president ran. And he's the current president, so he won. And President Alberto Fernandez actually does, in some speeches, say things like "Hola a todos, todas y todes," which is important in that he is aware that non-binary people exist, right? He is not only using todes to mean all men and all women, but I am naming men, women, and people. So we are aware that this is actually an intentional thing in which he is decentering men, centering a national identity, and also he is raising awareness that the generic masculine just isn't okay. This is also happening outside of politics. So there's things, this is from like a mutual agreement from a co-op in Spain in 2005, which is using an equal sign instead of a morpheme. Of course, this isn't all the work, right? You can't just say you include non-binary people and that's that. This could also be binary, and they could also believe that there's only men and women. But in, again, they are decentering the male morpheme and they are centering something else instead. They are opting to put equality above the norm and above men and above the neutral, whatever you want to call it. And there's another example on here from the Basque Country Pride from this year, which I believe didn't even happen, but you know they tried, which has an underscore so that you can fill your own gender in. And what all of these things are doing is they are giving up their power and their responsibility and putting it onto whoever the reader is. I'm sure that some people could read these without filling something in, but most of our instinct, particularly if we're going to say this aloud, is to put something in it, but you can decide whatever you want it to be. You can use the feminine because that's what you use for yourself, or because that's what fits the situation. You can use whichever one you want. Of course, all of this is happening from leftist parties, organizations, radical queer groups, rather than the right, because it's not a part of their platform, right? The right doesn't care to support gender equality. They don't care to support women or acknowledge that non-binary people exist, so they're not going to use it, and it is in their best interest to keep using the generic masculine. If anything, they can use this at symbol, like in todes, todos, todas, which in the non-binary community, we generally agree is a binarist approach, because at its heart, it's an A inside of an O. It circumvents the O/A thing that some people do in putting it in one symbol, but it still means OA, it still means men and women. And I've done some slight searches on whether any right-wing political parties are using it. I haven't found a lot. I found a couple of blog posts, but there's definitely absolutely no official materials, like no posters, no campaign, anything, because it's always men. This also happens a little bit in, hold on, I'm getting, this also happens a little bit in English too, right? So we get some place on words that are homonyms, like I support all my sisters, not just my sisters. The X is also present in English, like in woman and person. And again, you can't read these, like you wouldn't be able to read the symbols. And it's not that we see women and we think it's men plus whoa. We know that it means woman, but it still carries some extra connotations. And the same thing happens with things like her story, right? We know that his story doesn't mean a story of men, but in saying her story, we are centering that this is history from a feminist perspective. And in the same way, some people in Spanish or some Spanish users are changing non-personal gender, such as here where we have, can I do a laser pointer? I can do a laser pointer. Hey, sobre el tapete cualquier cuerpe, cuerpe would be body, and it would be masculine in English. Bodies don't have, or sorry, masculine in Spanish. Bodies don't have gender, right? But it's Spanish, so it needs to have grammatical gender, like my table does. But there's some groups that decide to change the grammatical gender of cuerpo in order to visibilize that it's not about men. I'm sure that they are welcome in this event, but it's not about them. And there's also been a rise of feminist groups or feminist adjacent groups that are using grupa instead of grupo, even though, again, like groups don't have gender, groups don't care about their gender, but grupo would be generally masculine. So two quick takeaways, I guess, from all of this, or two interesting things are that Romance languages are engaging in some innovation that's related to gender morphemes, but it's beyond personal gender, which is really, really cool. And that as people lose the generic masculine, which is also happening more and more, people are opting to substitute gender marks with ideology or identity marks or other things because we have this sort of empty space now that we can fill with anything. I have, again, these slides are on the website. You can find them. There's a little bit more on non-binary language, on mom friend. Kirby Conrad has some research on how you can use singular they to either actively gender a person or to skip over information in the same way that INL and DNL works. And just the references for the artwork that I put in there. And that's it.